So hello everyone, my name is Frank Lee. I'm an assistant professor at Georgia Tech, although today I'm going to talk about work that I did while visiting at Facebook. I'm going to talk about a web technique called link shimming and what its security and privacy contributions are in the modern web ecosystem. Now many of you may not have heard of link shimming before, so let me first describe what it is. Link shimming is related to link navigations, which are obviously a really common and important aspect of the web experience. Now, during link navigation, there are a few security and privacy concerns that arise. The first of which is that the navigation source, or the web page where the user clicked on the link, may be leaked to the destination website via the HTTP referrer header. Now, this can be a privacy concern when this location is sensitive, such as for a specific Facebook profile or group page. Another concern is that the navigation protocol may be less secure than ideal, such as when the link is an HTTP one, but the destination does support HTTPS. Finally, the navigation destination itself may be dangerous for the user to visit. Now, link shimming is a technique that websites can use to essentially interpose on this link navigation process to try and protect users from the concerns I just mentioned. Now, when a website is using link shimming, instead of embedding the destination URL directly into the web page, it's actually rewritten to point to a link shim endpoint. And then the original destination is passed to the endpoint as a URL parameter. That way the endpoint knows where to navigate to eventually. So the example here is what you might see with Facebook's implementation of link shimming. Now, as a result, when a user clicks on this link, they're actually clicking in a link to the link shim endpoint, so they get directed there first. At this endpoint, the website can deploy some techniques that I'll discuss shortly to try and address the navigation concerns I mentioned earlier before finally redirecting to the original destination, assuming that it's deemed safe to do so. Now, while some of you may not have heard of link shimming before, it's quite likely that you've encountered it on a regular basis. And that's because link shimming is used by popular online services and it's been used for well over a decade. This includes social networks and social media websites, email and messaging platforms, search engines, and security services. Now, despite how prevalent link shimming is across some of these popular services, we have actually very little information on what its security and privacy contributions are in practice, especially considering the modern web context. Because link shimming was designed over a decade ago when the web was very different, and since then, we've developed potential alternatives to link shimming. So this question of what link shimming security and privacy contributions are in the modern web, this question is what's the overarching question behind this study. So let's start by looking at what some of these modern web alternatives might be. I'm going to look at only 2 out of the 3 navigation concerns and leave the third one for the paper. So when it comes to the navigation source, this is protecting the privacy of the HTTP referrer. With link shimming, the endpoint is interposing on the navigation, so it ends up being set as the HTTP referrer, and as a result, the destination doesn't actually learn the specific web page that the user clicked the link on. Now, in the modern web ecosystem, modern browsers offer websites a couple different mechanisms actually for controlling the HTTP referrer, which can be used to achieve the privacy desired. When it comes to navigation destination, this is trying to deter users from visiting malicious websites. With link shimming, when the endpoint determines that the destination is potentially malicious, it can warn the user and hopefully deter them from visiting. With modern browsers, they actually have something very similar. They have built-in browser interstitials, such as those of Chrome and Firefox that rely on Google Safe Browsing. Now, what we want to do in the study is we want to analyze what link shimming's contributions are in terms of navigation, security, and privacy, especially compared to some of these potential web alternatives, modern web alternatives. So to do this, we analyzed 1 month of data from Facebook on Facebook's actual implementation of link shimming. So we looked at 6 billion link shim navigations, where we looked at the timestamp and what link shim actions were happening, such as whether a warning page was being displayed. We could differentiate between individual browser clients as well as understand their characteristics from the user agent, such as what was the browser software or version used. We also studied how users engaged with the link shim warnings and whether they clicked through to the destination or not. So on the right here, I'm showing 2 of the warnings that we looked at in this study. The top red one is the warning for a malicious website or a malicious destination. The bottom one is actually a little specific to link shimming. It's a warning about an open redirection concern that might arise due to the design of link shimming. Now I'm going to leave the details about what exactly this concern is, how Facebook detects it in their implementation of link shimming, but ultimately this is warning users when there might be an open redirection concern. So by analyzing this data set, we can look at how link shimming operates in practice on a major online service. So let's first look at navigation source privacy. As I mentioned, modern browsers offer a couple different mechanisms for protecting the HTTP referrer, which can be used to achieve navigation source privacy. Now, these mechanisms were designed and deployed at different periods, and as a result, there are 3 different classes of browser clients out there. The first are these fully legacy clients that don't support any of the referrer privacy mechanisms, and as a result, link shimming is needed to improve referrer privacy. Another class are what are called partially legacy clients. I'm going to elide the details here, they're in the paper, but essentially these clients support one of the mechanisms, one of the referrer privacy mechanisms, but this mechanism offers a different privacy functionality trade-off compared to what's offered by link shimming, and for many websites they may actually prefer what link shimming has to offer. Finally, there are these modern browsers that support the most advanced HTTP referrer privacy mechanism, and here link shimming is not actually needed for source privacy because that mechanism is sufficient. So we analyzed the browser clients that navigated via link shimming and broke them down into which category of browser client they fall into, and we looked at some of the most popular browsers. So here I'm showing the proportion of each browser's population that fell into the fully or partially legacy categories. We see that there's a lot of variation among the different browsers, but for some popular browsers, there are rather significant legacy populations. Now in the paper, we dive a lot deeper into these legacy populations and their demographics, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to briefly touch on one interesting observation that we made, which is that the differences between these browsers actually manifest as differences across various geographic regions. So for example, Internet Explorer has a very large fully legacy population, and as a result, almost a quarter of South Korean clients were fully legacy due to the high IE usage there. Another is that mobile browsers are very popular in many African countries, and they also exhibit large legacy populations. So as a result, several African countries such as Ethiopia, Angola, Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo actually had very large legacy client populations. In fact, in some of these countries, the majority of clients were legacies. So from this, we see that link shimming can improve navigation source privacy for these legacy clients, which are actually, in practice, a rather sizable population, especially in certain geographic regions. Now turning to navigation destination security, here, link shimming aims to deter users from visiting malicious websites by warning them. So to understand if link shimming is effective at this, we analyze warning click-through behavior. So here I show a graph of the daily click-through rates for the 2 kinds of warnings that I showed earlier, the redirection and the suspicious URL warnings. This is across the month-long period of our data set. Now we see that on a daily basis, there is some variation in the click-through rates, and there are some outlying days, but overall the daily click-through rates are between 15 and 25%. Compared to modern browsers and modern browser interstitials, prior work showed that for Chrome and Firefox, the browser warning click-through rates were between 7 and 23%. So while there's some small difference here, overall we see that for link shim warnings, users are adhering to them similarly as they do to browser warnings themselves. Now in the paper, we conduct a much more extensive analysis of the warning click-through behavior, but I just wanted to highlight one interesting observation. When we looked at the suspicious URLs that were receiving link shim warnings, we actually saw that only 3% of them showed up in Google Safe Browsing, and hence only 3% of them would have eventually gotten a browser warning for browsers that use safe browsing, such as Chrome and Firefox. Now this is actually not terribly surprising in retrospect because Facebook deploys its own malicious URL detection system. And this allows Facebook to leverage its own data to detect malicious URLs in a way differently than, say, Google Safe Browsing can. Additionally, some of these malicious URLs may be specific to the Facebook platform, so hence only visible to Facebook. But from this, what we see overall is that link shim warnings do exhibit similar click-through rates as browser warnings. Users adhere to them similarly, but they allow specifically websites to deploy their own URL detection, which can provide potentially broader coverage than what's offered by browser block lists. So in this short talk today, I've had a chance to cover just a few of the results from the paper, but there are a lot more, so I encourage you to take a look if you're interested. I wanted to close though with some lessons that I think we take away from the study. The first is about link shimming itself, which is that despite these modern browser features, link shimming can meaningfully improve link navigation, security, and privacy. Now, I haven't had a chance to talk about some of the costs that are associated with link shimming, but those are discussed in the paper. Ultimately, this result is not meant to be prescriptive or advocate for the broad use of link shimming. Rather, it's meant to highlight that link shimming does come with benefits as well as costs, and ultimately sites must make their own decisions. Now, beyond link shimming, another lesson that I think we can take away from the study is that legacy scenarios can be very prevalent and important for security and privacy purposes, specifically when you go beyond a US or Western-centric perspective and look at a more global view, particularly looking at different geographic regions. So this is something that we should really consider in some of our other security and privacy problems. Another lesson is that website warnings can actually be effective. Now, prior work showed that browser warnings can also be effective, and this here extends that to website warnings where the warnings arise in the context of the website itself. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done in improving website warnings as well as understanding or kind of investigating in what security and privacy contexts can they be used effectively. A final thing that I wanted to just briefly note is that link shimming is a nice display of how web security responsibilities are really distributed among the different entities in the web ecosystem. So websites and browser vendors both have an important role to play in protecting users. So with that, thank you very much for tuning in. Please feel free to reach out with any questions or comments, and I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe and healthy.